Cybersecurity Risk Assessment, Team Australia, January 2022. The agenda for today, we're going to go through the overview of the Cybersecurity Risk Assessment, current measures, weakness within the organization, attack vectors, recommendations, and references. As cybersecurity risk and compliance professionals in the Australian government, the scope of our requirement is constantly changing and evolving in regards to regulatory requirements, operational disruptions, and risk from third parties are some of the areas that are becoming more costly and damaging to most organizations worldwide. An integrated risk and compliance program can help the Australian government navigate risk and pave way for organizations to follow suit. To perform an in-depth risk assessment for the Australian government, it comes down to three core elements, which are risk identification, risk analysis, and risk mitigation. To address all cyber incidents, the Australian team has identified the various attack vectors, created a vulnerability matrix, attributing analysis, and an incident response plan to be able to respond quickly and efficiently to all cyber attacks. The team has also identified best practices for authentication, authorization, and access control. Lastly, this team has also gathered information on the various mitigation strategies and recommendations on how to continuously keep the Australian government network secure during the summit and thereafter. Authentication is a method through which a user is identified with the use of an access control like a username or password. It is highly recommended for the Australian government to use multi-factor authentication to access any data, some of which are tokens, PIF card, retina scans, fingerprints, car card, whatever you can use. They can use a combination of one or two of these. Authorization is merely granting access or denying access to a user based on the assigned roles. So if you are properly authenticated, then you'll be authorized to get into the system. But if you don't properly authenticate yourself with those aforementioned car card or PIF card, then you will not be authorized to get into the system. So access control basically just gives a user the ability to perform a certain task within the organization. It's just a privilege. So depending on your security clearance level, you have the privilege or the opportunity to work with maybe classified documents. And if you have maybe a lower clearance level, then you might just be able to access certain documents within the organizations. And some of them are role-based access control, mandatory access control, discretionary access control, and identity-based access control. Some of the weaknesses within organizations, we're gonna do people. So some factors that are people related would be social engineering, human error, poor credentials, social engineering. Technology would be misconfiguration of hardware or software, unpatched system or legacy systems. Some of the policy would be single factor authentication, user privilege controls, and then password complexity cycle policies. Examples of attack vectors: ransomware, phishing, insider threat, misconfiguration, and malware. Some examples of data breach that occurred in Australia. The Canva data breach. It affected about 137 million users and happened in 2019. The Australian unicorn Canva suffered a monumental data breach impacting 137 million of its users. To put that into perspective, the online design tool currently has about 55 million active users, monthly users. The ambiguity data breach. This occurred in 2020, so it's one of the world's largest vendors of the Internet of Things devices, and it suffered a data breach after an intruder compromised the company's third-party provider and accessed their customer account credentials. Procter. This occurred in 2020 where sensitive information belonging to ProctorU, an online proctoring service for remote students, was leaked online for free on a dark web hacking forum. This incident was part of a larger dark data leak impacting 18 different companies and exposing a total of 386 million records. Attribution is the process of tracking, identifying, and laying blame on the perpetrator of a cyber attack. Security analysts come in to collect evidence, they build timelines, and try to piece together evidence in the wake of a cyber attack so they can identify who actually committed the breach. The vulnerability matrix was conducted, which identifies and categorizes the various attack vectors, the vulnerabilities to the system, the threat it faces to the system, and the impact it has on the system. So what is risk? When you have a threat to the system and a vulnerability, it equals a risk. So risk assessments are conducted in organizations with the primary purpose of identifying any loopholes within that system. And the proper way of identifying the system is to conduct a risk management um, analysis. You start by risk identification to identify the various risks within the system, a risk impact assessment, a risk prioritization analysis, and by the risk mitigation planning, implementation, and progress monitoring. So risk can either be accepted, transferred, shared, or mitigated depending on the cost and impact it has on the organization. So for risk to be accepted, the company is going to accept every single loss. So whatever comes at them, they are responsible for that. They can either transfer the risk. For in case of your car, when you have a car accident, you're transferring the risk over to the insurance company to take care of it because it's at no risk to you. That's why we pay car insurance. And the risk could be shared. So let's just say we have a platform like if we FedRAM is hosting or Amazon is hosting some of our systems. And in that case, there was a breach on the FedRAM side. So we will both share the responsibility to a certain extent. FedRAM is going to have its own responsibility. We'll have responsibility to make sure that um, our assets are up and back running in due time. And risk could be mitigated. When it's being mitigated or controlled, meaning that within the system we're going to put either supplemental controls to be able to prevent further harm from happening to the system, either by conducting um, bi-weekly scans or frequent assessments, or just making sure that we put in like firewalls or patch our systems as soon as possible to be able to control and mitigate those risks. Some of the recommendations we have is going to be having an awareness and training session yearly and when hired, implement acceptable use policies, frequent assessments of the system, and strict email communication policies. Also, we're going to scan the system bi-weekly, ensure that we are doing patch management either on a weekly basis or daily basis, and also have backups, backing up the system daily and as needed. Um, Lastly, we're also going to implement a security suite of tools like firewall, antivirus, and email filters. It is good to know that it's almost impossible to eliminate risk completely. The best we can do as an organization is to constantly assess our systems to ensure that there are no loopholes and have security awareness training yearly with our staff and mandate users to always sign the rules of behavior prior to hire and every year in order to understand how to use sensitive information within the organization.